All right, so maybe you're like, what's Sonata Allegro? What's Sonata form? What is this guy talking about? And let me explain Sonata Allegro quickly. Sonata was the form, the classical form of the style of mainly the 1700s. This is coming after Baroque music, and this style is seen as a container to us music theorists, um, but to a composer, it's seen as an opportunity. And I'll say why in a second. This style is usually when you're presenting to an audience of significant size. It's different than, say, more intimate chamber music or just more intimate pieces where you're not necessarily using this structured container to fill your ideas out with. And that's what makes it so time spanning, is that this form has been used and developed to do a lot of what we see. And it's highly poetic, it's highly entwined with poetics. So it gives the listener a sense of um, auditory experience through poetry, just by these key relationships and just by these um, sections of the sonata. If you want to know more about in depth with the sonata, there's so many videos out there that will explain it to you. Let me just tell you the bare bones of it. So it's three parts. And the three parts, you basically get beginning, middle, end, which is a huge point of the sonata, to make these sections have weight to them and to try to create balance, or your messaging is in, if you have a really short beginning but a really long ending, like, right, that has certain connotations to it. I would also say that this style within this ABA, it takes these three sections and does something different each section. So the A section at the beginning of a sonata is known as the exposition, and it's where a composer lays out their main themes, lays out their paragraph, lays out their statement, right? And this part of the sonata, this part of the form, has to grab the listener's attention. It has to grab the audience's attention. That's its whole point. So now the development section comes, and this is where the composer can be themselves, and they can, like, be as heady as they want to be. They develop their main idea. Maybe they make it, they augment it, or they diminish it in some ways, or they fragment it, or they elaborate on it, or they continue it, or they create something new from it. But all of this is fair game for the sonata, for the B part of the sonata section. So usually, if your A section is in a major key, your B section is then in its relative minor or the minor of that key. If your sonata is in a minor key, then your B section is usually in the relative major of that minor key. And this is created because the main conflict or the main drama of the sonata is this tension, is this sense of starting in one place, what we call home, and you leave. And so then, now that we're in the B section and we've left, and usually composers cycle through many keys of this section, or they go the furthest away from their home key, they explore that area tonality wise, to then have another A section, which is known as the recapitulation. And that means we're basically wrapping everything up with a nice little bow. Now, the interesting thing about the recapitulation is, because you've had this expectation and you've had this drama and you're trying to create a sense of balance, the recapitulation usually ends up being a repeat of your A section, sometimes literally, most of the time environmentally wise. Like, the composer creates the same environments that they use in this original section to make you feel this drama come to an end. So they're wrapping up everything. And this usually has to have also a coda that harmonically lets you know everything has ended. There isn't going to be a surprise after this. There's no more work to happen. This is it. And Beethoven is probably the one that we get the most example for, because he always does what? He does a literal expectation of right? So this kind of idea is, like, essential to the recapitulation. Now let's jump in and see what Kendrick Lamar does. Listen, I apologize. I'm getting it together over here, so I don't have a ring light. I don't have microphones on me right now, and I still think it's so important that I record this and get this documented, just because that's the way that the world works. And although it's not flashy yet, bear with me. there's a sense to me that what's most important are the notes and what's most important is the score. So I did a really due diligent job of this first analysis, but I want to continue to explore it and go as deep as I can into it, which may take the next 5 years of my career. Because again, I believe important works deserve to be studied and they deserve to be picked apart and they deserve to be recreated in a lot of ways. So it's my hope to recreate my own work with this analysis. I do want to emphasize that I am a composer, so I'm going to be looking at this thing harmonically, like a score, like I would any great score. And I don't have any bias to the information that I receive when it comes to scores. I study all composers. My genre, my bag, my lane are composers like Prokofiev, Shostakovich, John Coltrane, mainly because these composers were resistance composers in my mind, and they were able to create material that was something that at that time period was very not just frowned upon, but like socially it was dangerous. And all these composers lived phenomenal lives around the scores that they created and how they created their pieces and how they promoted everything. So my own compositions, if you want to take a listen to a few of them, they're on YouTube and on different platforms. But if you've heard my compositional style, I pull from very much the Russian tradition, the Soviet tradition, more than I do the Germanic tradition or even American tradition. Although Coltrane has had such a huge impact on all saxophone players, so I will, as just me being a researcher and something that I'm passionate about doing, be doing more research on particularly the artist that the old guard is dead is by. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but you know he's from Philadelphia. He's a new artist that's up and coming. All the tracklist songs, the songs as they are in their original form, most of them I am familiar with. Just following Kendrick's career, some of them I'm not familiar with. Some of it was impossible to be familiar with. So I want to familiarize myself more with those and continue to do more of a deep dive into some of these excellent analyses on both YouTube and social media. My name is Charles Morrell III. I am a composer, performer based in the Boston area right now, East Coast familiar, born and raised in Dover, Delaware. And I've been a Kendrick fan my entire career, particularly because he is probably one of the most, to me, important and political composers that are out there. And he does a great job of fitting all of this within his medium of hip hop and rap. I'm going to strictly focus on the harmonic analysis. I believe he's writing a Sonata Allegro. His Sonata Allegro, his Sonata piece, Sonata form piece. This is something that all great composers do. I'm going to get into the first. No. So you get this nice. That's known as a diminished chord. A diminished chord. Diminished chords create ambiguity. Something's like, what's going to happen? Something's going to happen. And then what does he do? We know that's from the famous piece, "The Old Guard is Dead." And this is how he sets up our harmonic cue. So you have this nice B diminished, fully diminished over a G, which in this context makes sense that that chord would lead to either C minor or C major. But in this case, he goes to C minor. Interesting implications about that. We'll talk about that as we go on. But let me just show you what would happen if he were to give us our expectation from the very beginning, which is Not Like Us. It would go, because the beginning part of Not Like Us is, and it goes into, and C minor is in there, but it's not as a tonic. This will be very important later. Okay, so if we had this original and it went to the most expected part of our mind, right? We would go there. But what's interesting is that's not technically how he ends it, right? We all know that. He ends with, in that context, this cadence becomes a deceptive cadence to which is very interesting. We'll talk about why later. All right, but let's go on with what actually happens. You have Sam Jackson with that nice little sample of his. I'm going to double check. I forget. It's from the unreleased GNX album. You get this while he's talking, and he's talking about the Great American Game. And that's also really interesting because these are just simple triad pairs, but they're not really in place of what we just said. They're out of place, but that'd be the reason why. One thing I want to talk about first before we get started, this chord to this chord basically lines out the entire design of his set choice, of all of the choices that he made. Really interesting to me because he hits all these key centers. Let's go through how. All right, so you get this, and you get this nice A major chord over a G. So again, this G is seeming like it's important. These three notes, A major seems pretty important, A, C sharp, and E. And so now you're set up for this kind of augmented sound in G. If I had to guess where that could go, this is really hard because this chord doesn't have a place. But yeah, if I were to, I would probably, because it sounds like a A7 chord with this in the bass, I would probably go to D. But he doesn't. He does hit D as the first note though. Does this nice little pattern, which kind of sounds like C minor. But he does something where he adds that note in there, which is in A. Nothing's needed. You all know. So these beautiful kind of suspended chords. Let me play this one more time with the right notes suspended. Now here's something that's interesting is with these notes, this is D minor, D, F, and A. This is C minor. So they're at conflict with each other already. And then tiramisu drops here, G minor. Okay, so he does tiramisu, G minor, nothing out of the ordinary, but G minor is the opposite to this. Okay, so he's starting his Sonata Allegro. This is theme, we'll call theme 1, this G minor, which is actually precluded by, because that's actually very important. All right, so now let's move to these beautiful chords that he hits. He does this beautiful, beautiful C minor chord, but he puts an A in there. So it really changes the sound. But in his orchestration, you can barely hear the A. It's like kind of embedded up underneath. You get something like that. And then he... What? Huh? What chord is this? It's like a beautiful suspended chord. So something I forgot to mention in the beginning, when he does this, the top voices seem to go up to this. And this G sharp, and A sounding like, in some ways, almost sounds like a mistake, but we're going to come back to that because it's really important. But he kind of does the same thing here with these chords, this C minor chord, then this D flat suspended chord, because the someone better squabble up, it sounds almost like they're just doing something distinct, but they're not. They are actually mimicking the very first thing that we hear. So I should go back and explain what we hear. So after we get this beautiful, you hear, and that's the buttons pressed on the game where he's entering in the cheat code, which some say is a God code, some say it's 59 lives. We're left to wonder. But he opens up with that to set us into, right? Now this would be a C minor, but then you get this B flat. And it kind of creates more ambiguity because it's not necessarily E flat or C minor. But I have a theory as to why he needs to add this B flat. It's very important for getting our ear ready, which is what this whole piece is about. Getting your ear ready. Okay. So now let's go back down to Someone Better Squabble Up. He sets us up perfectly for the, which is not really related. It's related to C minor. This key is F minor. And this is actually really important too, because this motif will come back to haunt us later. This is 1-4-1 in F minor, but both of the chords are minor. So you get this beautiful song. This part I'm kind of indiscriminate about because he leaves us off with that note, not the tonic. He leaves us off with a third, which is odd and a odd Sonata Allegro. So this is now the second theme. So let's recap. The first theme, we're going to call this G minor song. That's the first theme. The whole song is the theme. And then we get this nice little interjection. Are we paying attention? Are you really paying attention? And then this is a second theme. He leaves us off there, and then it sounds like he's speak singing in a lot of ways. It sounds like he kind of does that. Not confirmed, not sure. But this next beautiful interlude, intermission that we've come to expect from Kendrick Lamar. Now this is interesting because this little B minor to A major, and that bass is really important. That's why it's colored the way that it is. We'll talk about that in a second. And he leaves us off with the A major chord, which in C minor you can hear it doesn't belong. It doesn't belong. A major chord does not belong at this point. Okay. And so now we get into kind of like the coda of his first part. So we had that first theme in G minor. The second theme is right next door, F minor. Really far though harmonically, not super close. And now he leaves us off on this A major to, whoa. You hear that? That's a tritone. And now this becomes interesting. You know that's humble, right? And it's interesting because this E flat to E, and then down to B flat, he's basically already uncovered all of these. And this is also interesting because E flat is a third note in the C minor triad. But here E flat does not fit in because we're technically in E flat minor, which is an interesting relationship from C minor. One of my favorites, but it's also really subtle. It's a subtle nod, I think. So now we're here, and this E is the same tritone as. So we're in a conflict, and he does something really interesting here. He like hits this nice E flat. Are you paying attention? E flat. And he even reinforces with this E flat and this E natural again. I'm thinking that again, in him closing out his exposition, let's call it that, he's wrapping up all of his themes. So you have this the E flat and then this half step, which is really related to what he's been doing with this B fully diminished. If you know anything about your chords, you know what the B fully diminished chord spells out. With the G on there though, and then that's really like his thesis, and I understand why as a hip hop head. That's why there's the reason why this is his thesis, and there's also a reason why we're here in his music. I'm not gonna reveal that why yet. So now you have basically his theme, and he kind of drives it home with his last song, which in the context of how we hear it seems to like just darken up. I got loyalty and royalty inside my DNA is of course what he's singing it, but it seems just really dark, and it's specifically done that way because instead of it just being a regular B minor or E flat minor like we've been dealing with, this E flat minor, that's a Phrygian minor sound, and this is also a Phrygian minor sound because you get this A and C rubbing against B minor, of course. And I'm going to go back and listen to all the original track list songs because I have so many curiosities around were these choices put in there for this show? Like, did he add this? Or was that always in there? It's a good question. So now we've come to the end of our exposition. We get one more tune, which is a new song that we haven't heard. And this is interesting. It's a tune in D minor, which again I've already talked about how I think D minor is the key that he's really getting us ready for. About how D minor doesn't fit into C minor, and you could have right, but D minor is a deceptive cadence from there. Either way, we're in D minor, and he gives us D minor and A minor as the chords that are going back and forth in his orchestration at this point. And then you hear his it sounds like he's singing again, and you get that little motif, and then we're by the light corner. And I believe that this is his development section. The reason why is because now we're in F sharp minor. This is really interesting because not only is he bringing in this G major chord in the context of F sharp minor, making it a Phrygian sound, again, a darker sound. Yeah, let me just like kind of, if you were in F sharp minor, you would go to this chord to create the most but he's not doing that yet. And he ends on this really weird, awkward note. And he's like, is it? Sounds like he's playing A flat or G. I'll let you all help me with this. But then the guys, they sing him into this next song. And in the context of his development, most developments mirror the slow movement of sonatas. And I think that's why he puts the ballads right here. Just really simply put. And this first ballad is really interesting. This is actually over the sound over. We get this sound. Right, with the track that's playing, which is another interesting choice that he uses for the orchestration there while Samuel Jackson's talking. But the chords, you have C minor, you have, which we've already covered. You have F minor, which we've already covered. And then you have this B flat minor down to this A. And this is actually really interesting because it's another augmented chord, or it's an augmented chord, which again is opposite of a diminished chord. But he uses almost like a dominant sound going to the next song. And this is like really interesting. I love this visual, by the way. Just them in the X is beautiful. How, and he peaks up. So you get peekaboo in this C minor. Right, peekaboo's in C minor. Okay. But it has this A flat in there. Which again doesn't really necessarily belong or not belong, but I think and this A flat sounds really weird because it sounds almost like he's pushing the sound, not like I'm pressing the sound. So I'm clearly pressing A flat. It's like he's pushing, but he pushes it a little past A flat to A, but then settles back down. And then this is actually one of my favorite parts of this whole thing, because again peekaboo, yes doc, right? He interrupts C minor with the triad again. This time it is the notes C and A. And he plays this little motif with the voices singing in unison, which is really beautiful. And he's talking about what we're waiting for while this A minor is happening in the voices. And then you hear that sounds out of place when we hear it, although it's right in the place it's supposed to be. And that's another interesting concept, because why would you have A minor with B minor and C minor? You have A minor, B minor, and C minor all happening at the same time. And what's really interesting about that is, like, when you bear it down, those are the notes that you get. And I think that's really his point. That's now he's developed all of his themes into this one cell. Wow, this one cell. And this cell is a blues minor, Phrygian-ish sounding sound. Not necessarily Phrygian, because you don't get that, but you don't get like a regular A minor. You get, okay, I think that's really important. So you get that. He's saying there. And this is beautifully setting us up again, this A, for the next song, which is a ballad.